the beautiful baby who was found in a river. The children of Israel stayed in the land of Egypt much longer than they had expected to stay. They were in that land about 400 years. And the going down to Egypt proved a great blessing to them. It saved their lives during the years of famine and need. After the years of need were over, they found the soil in the land of Goshen, that part of Egypt where they were living, very rich, so that they could gather 3 or 4 crops every year. Then, too, some of the sons of Israel, before they came to Egypt, had begun to marry the women in the land of Canaan, who worshipped idols, and not the Lord. If they had stayed there, their children would have grown up like the people around them, and soon would have lost all knowledge of God. But in Goshen they lived alone and apart from the people of Egypt. They worshipped the Lord God and were kept away from the idols of Egypt. And in that land, as the years went on, from being 70 people, they grew in number, until they became a great multitude. Each of the 12 sons of Jacob was the father of a tribe, and Joseph was the father of 2 tribes, which were named after his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. As long as Joseph lived, and for some time after, the people of Israel were treated kindly by the Egyptians, out of their love for Joseph, who had saved Egypt from suffering by famine. But after a long time another king began to rule over Egypt, who cared nothing for Joseph or Joseph's people. He saw that the Israelites, as the children of Israel were called, were very many, and he feared lest they would soon become greater in number and in power than the Egyptians. He said to his people, "Let us rule these Israelites more strictly. They are growing too strong." Then they set harsh rulers over the Israelites, who laid heavy burdens on them. They made the Israelites work hard for the Egyptians, and build cities for them, and give to the Egyptians a large part of the crops from their fields. They set them at work in making brick, and in building storehouses. They were so afraid that the Israelites would grow in number that they gave orders to kill all the little boys that were born to the Israelites, though their little girls might be allowed to live. But in the face of all this hate and wrong and cruelty, the people of Israel were growing in numbers, and becoming greater and greater. At this time, when the wrongs of the Israelites were of the greatest, and when their little children were being killed, one little boy was born. He was such a lovely child that his mother kept him hid, so that the enemies did not find him. When she could no longer hide him, she found a plan to save his life, believing that God would help her and save her beautiful little boy. She made a little box like a boat, and covered it with something that would not let the water into it. Such a boat as this, covered over, was called an ark. She knew that at certain times the daughter of King Pharaoh, all the kings of Egypt were called Pharaoh, would come down to the river for a bath. She placed her baby boy in the ark, and let it float down the river where the princess, Pharaoh's daughter, would see it. And she sent her own daughter, a little girl named Miriam, 12 years old, to watch close at hand. How anxious the mother and the sister were as they saw the little ark floating away from them on the river. Pharaoh's daughter, with her maids, came down to the river, and they saw the ark floating on the water among the reeds. She sent one of her maids to bring it to her, so that she might see what was in the curious box. They opened it, and there was a beautiful little baby who began to cry to be taken up. The princess felt kind toward the little one, and loved it at once. She said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children. You have heard how the children of Israel came to be called Hebrews. See Story 16. Pharaoh's daughter thought that it would be cruel to let such a lovely baby as this die out on the water. And just then a little girl came running up to her as if by accident, and she looked at the baby also, and said, "Shall I go and find some woman of the Hebrews to be a nurse to the child for you, and take care of it?" "Yes," said the princess, "go and find a nurse for me." The little girl, who was Miriam, the baby's sister, ran as quickly as she could and brought the baby's own mother to the princess. Miriam showed in this act that she was a wise and thoughtful little girl. The princess said to the little baby's mother, "Take this child to your home and nurse it for me, and I will pay you wages for it." How glad the Hebrew mother was to take her child home! No one could harm her boy now, for he was protected by the princess of Egypt, the daughter of the king. When the child was large enough to leave his mother, Pharaoh's daughter took him into her own home in the palace. She named him Moses, a word that means drawn out, because he was drawn out of the water. So Moses, the Hebrew boy, lived in the palace among the nobles of the land, as the son of the princess. There he learned much more than he could have learned among his own people, for there were very wise teachers among the Egyptians. Moses gained all the knowledge that the Egyptians had to give. There, in the court of the cruel king who had made slaves of the Israelites, God's people, was growing up an Israelite boy who should at some time set his people free. Although Moses grew up among the Egyptians and gained their learning, he loved his own people. They were poor and were hated and were slaves, but he loved them because they were the people who served the Lord God, while the Egyptians worshipped idols and animals. Strange it was that so wise a people as these should bow down and pray to an ox, or to a cat, or to a snake, as did the Egyptians. When Moses became a man, he went among his own people, leaving the riches and ease that he might have enjoyed among the Egyptians. He felt a call from God to lift up the Israelites and set them free. But at that time he found that he could do nothing to help them. They would not let him lead them, and as the king of Egypt had now become his enemy, Moses went away from Egypt into a country in Arabia called Midian. He was sitting by a well in that land, tired from his long journey, when he saw some young women come to draw water for their flocks of sheep. But some rough men came and drove the women away, and took the water for their own flocks. Moses saw it, and helped the women, and drew the water for them. These young women were sisters, the daughters of a man named Jethro, who was a priest in the land of Midian. He asked Moses to live with him, and to help him in the care of his flocks. Moses stayed with Jethro, and married one of his daughters. So, from being a prince in the king's palace in Egypt, Moses became a shepherd in the wilderness of Midian. It must have been a great change in the life of Moses, after he had spent 40 years in the palace as a prince, to go out into the wilderness of Midian, and live there as a shepherd. He saw no more the crowded cities, the pyramids, the temples of Egypt, and the great river Nile. For 40 years Moses wandered about the land of Midian with his flocks, living alone, often sleeping at night on the ground and looking up by day to the great mountains. He wore the rough skin mantle of a shepherd, and in his hand was the long shepherd's staff. On his feet were sandals which he wore instead of shoes. But when he stood before an altar to worship God, he took off his sandals. For when we take off our hats, as in church or a place where God is worshipped, the people of those lands take off their shoes as a sign of reverence in the sacred place. Moses was a great man, one of the greatest men that ever lived. But he did not think himself great or wise. He was contented with the work that he was doing, and sought no higher place. But God had a work for Moses to do, and all through those years in the wilderness God was preparing him for that work. All through those years, while Moses was feeding his flock in Midian, the people of Israel were still bearing heavy burdens and working as slaves in Egypt, making brick and building cities. The king who had begun the hard treatment of the Israelites died, but another king took his place and was just as cruel. He was called by the same name, Pharaoh, for this was the name given to all the kings of Egypt. One day Moses was feeding his flock on a mountain called Mount Horeb. This mountain was also called Mount Sinai, and is spoken of by both names in the Bible. On the mountain Moses saw a bush which seemed to be on fire. He watched to see it burn up, but it was not destroyed, though it kept burning on and on. And Moses said to himself, "I will go and look at this strange thing, a bush on fire, yet not burning up." As Moses was going toward the bush, he heard a voice coming out of the bush calling him by name, "Moses, Moses." He listened and said, "Here I am." The voice said, "Moses, do not come near, but take off your shoes from your feet, for you are standing on holy ground." So Moses took off his shoes and came near to the burning bush. And the voice came from the bush, saying, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. I have seen the wrongs and the cruelty that my people have suffered in Egypt, and I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. And I am coming to set them free from the land of the Egyptians, and to bring them up to their own land, the land of Canaan, a good land and large. Come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh the king of Egypt, and you shall lead out my people from Egypt." Moses knew what a great work this would be, to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, from the power of its king. He dreaded to take up such a task, and he said to the Lord, "O Lord, who am I, a shepherd here in the wilderness, to do this great work, to go to Pharaoh, and to bring the people out of Egypt? It is too great a work for me." And God said to Moses, "Surely I will be with you, and will help you to do this great work. I will give you a sign of my presence with you. When you have led my people out of Egypt, you shall bring them to this mountain, and they shall worship me here. And then you shall know that I have been with you." And Moses said to God, "When I go to the children of Israel in Egypt, and tell them that the God of their fathers has sent me, they will say to me, 'Who is this God? What is his name?' For they have suffered so much, and have sunk so low, that I fear they have forgotten their God." You remember that Moses had been out of Egypt and afar from his people for 40 years, a long time, and in that time he did not know whether they had continued the worship of God. And God said to Moses, "My name is I Am, the one who is always living. Do you go to your people and say to them, 'I Am hath sent me to you.' Do not be afraid. Go to your people and say to them what I have said to you, and they will listen to you and believe. And you shall take the elders of your tribes, the leading men among them, and shall go to King Pharaoh, and shall say to him, 'Let my people go, that they may worship me in the wilderness.' At first he will not let you go, but afterward I will show my power in Egypt, and then he will let you go out of the land." But Moses wished some sign which he could give to his people and to the Egyptians, to show them that God had sent him. He asked God to give him some sign. And God said to him, "What is that which you have in your hand?" Moses said, "It is a rod, my shepherd's staff, which I use to guide the sheep." And God said, "Throw it on the ground." Then Moses threw it down, and instantly it was turned into a snake. Moses was afraid of it, and began to run from it. And God said, "Do not fear it, but take hold of it by the tail." Moses did so, and at once it became again a rod in his hand. And God said again to Moses, "Put your hand into your bosom, under your garment, and take it out again." Then Moses put his hand under his garment, and when he took it out it had changed, and was now as white as snow, and covered with a scaly crust like the hand of a leper. He looked at it with fear and horror, but God said to him again, "Put your hand into your bosom once more." Moses did so, and when he took it out, his hand was like the other, with a pure skin, no longer like a leper's hand. And God said to Moses, "When you go to speak my words, if they will not believe you, show them the first sign, and let your rod become a snake, and then a rod again. And if they still refuse to believe your words, show them the second sign, turn your hand into a leper's hand, and then bring it back as it was before. And if they still will not believe, then take some water from the river, and it shall turn to blood. Fear not, go and speak my words to your own people and to the Egyptians." But Moses was still unwilling to go, not because he was afraid, but because he did not feel himself to be fit for such a great task. And he said to the Lord, "O Lord, thou knowest that I am not a good speaker. I am slow of speech, and cannot talk before men." And God said, "Am I not the Lord who made man's mouth? Go, and I will be with your lips, and will teach you what to say." But Moses still hesitated, and he said, "O Lord, choose some other man for this great work. I am not able to do it." And God said, "You have a brother whose name is Aaron. He can speak well. Even now he is coming to see you in the wilderness. Let him help you and speak for you. Let him do the speaking, and do you show the signs which I have given to you." At last Moses yielded to God's call. He went from Mount Sinai with his flocks, and took them home to Jethro his father-in-law. And then he went toward Egypt, and on the way he met his brother coming to see him. Then the two brothers, Moses and Aaron, came to the elders of Israel in the land of Goshen. They told the people what God had said, and they wrought before them the signs which God had given. And the people said, "God has seen all our troubles, and at last he is coming to set us free." And they were glad, and gave thanks to God who had not forgotten them, for God never forgets those who call upon him.